Nancy and I are deeply saddened by the terrible accident with the Challenger rocket. We know that you all feel the same pain. The people in our country. This really a loss for everyone. NASA kept some Challenger papers were locked away. Something changed in 2022. It was made public that files showed that the disaster wasn't a mistake. It was able to avoid. They tried to stop the start the night before. They begged NASA should not fly. People said they would die, but someone called that shut them up. The call came from the top levels. The real story of who gave that order has finally shown up. What it will change what they've been hiding. What you thought you knew about the 28th of January, 1986. The rocket into space Challenger did not start out as a rocket ship. It began as a test group in 1976-1978. A simple frame known as TA-099 is a structural test article made to handle stress and vibrations only tests. Nothing in the beginning said it would carry people one day into space. After that, NASA make a brave choice. They chose this test. The spaceship could turn into a real launcher and work to make the shuttle service bigger. It had a new identity, a new reason for being, and in the end a new name, Challenger. The name came from a British author in the 1800s. The HMS Challenger is a research ship, and it brought that desire to learn from us soon as work on it started. By July 1982, the shuttle was fixed up and arrived at Kennedy Space Center for the last time making plans. Even though it looked ready, took months of fits, checks, and tests. Things started to fit together slowly. Then, in April 1983, Challenger stood on the pad for STS-6, its first flight. That flight was the first one for the program. Real goal for operations. Business had it only slid. It was Columbia that had the early weight. Challenger stepped up now. Moving forward and almost right away became NASA's main machine. From 1983 to 1985, it was able to fly 9 times. Not another shuttle kept up with that speed in those years. Each task had a purpose. Important. It was on STS-7 in 1983. Put Sally Ride in space, and she came to space as the first American woman. A few months later, on STS-8, Guy was on board. He was the first person to do this, African and American, to go beyond Earth. Things kept getting better on the bus, like these. Back in 1984, on STS-41B, NAS added the first spacewalk without being attached. Hikes with jetpacks. It didn't look real, it was real, though. Later tasks fixed satellites. SunMax was saved by STS-41C. Satellite. Space was used for other projects. Lab units that are full of science. Challenger took care of everything. Late 1985, it had the biggest crew still. 8 people on STS-61A made it through the first night launch, and the whole shuttle landed at night. A program like 1986 was coming up. Challenger was STS's getting ready for its 10th flight. 51L. This wasn't just any trip. It had something special about it that the whole country paid close attention. The plan was going to send a teacher into space. In 1984, Ronald Reagan was president. The government made the teacher in. People will be more interested in the space project for NASA. More than 11,000 people liked the idea. People from all over the country applied. From a 37-year-old social worker in that big group, a teacher of studies from New Hampshire was chosen. Krista McAuliffe. Her warm attitude and her desire to become a teacher, people became interested in lessons from space. The reporters paid close attention to her training, every meeting, every detail, and every feel-good. There were technical goals for the mission, too. The team would set up a tracking device and a satellite for sending info. They were going to, from space, look at Hall's Comet. However, McAuliffe's speech would have been the best part. Broadcasts in the classroom. Kids would listen to their teacher talk from space. Up until the end of 1985, Challenger team ready for this moment. In December it was 1985 when the shuttle rolled out to launch. Pad 39B and was the first shuttle to go there. To use that pad ever. The first one. The start date was set for January 22, 1986. But the way to launch got rough almost right away. The job that came before STS-51L, that was STS-61 Con Columbia, took a long time and was late timeline for Challenger. No good weather made things worse. Launch fell to January 23, then to January 24, then once more to January 25 because of an emergency. It wasn't safe to land in other countries. When 25th came around, the team knew they couldn't change how the shuttle was set up. In time for a flight in the morning. So, they had moved again, this time to January 27 th. The 7 team members arrived on January 27. Members put on their gear and went into the hop-on. It felt like everything was closed, it seemed like anything was possible, but trouble came back almost as soon as they were get ready. The hatch's handle was broken. Fixed that got stuck and wouldn't move. Let go. People lost hours while they worked. I tried to fix it. At one point, they had to cut the piece out by hand. When the door was finally shut, and there were winds at Kennedy's, the runway got too strong to be safe, landing in an emergency. The team went to sleep. All the way through the night of January 27, 1986. Having no idea that a calm storm was coming in the ground while they thought about the next morning. Those working at Morton, it was tense in the classroom. A phone call with NASA to try to stop something they thought was going to happen. For in the past 9 years, they had been worried about a small part of the shuttle's sposts, the O-rings, and the small rubber seals meant to keep fumes from burning from getting out of the solid rocket. Extra help. Fears had been raised as early as 1977, when tests showed the O-rings had holes in them. By 1985, there was no longer any doubt about the proof. There had been damage and wind on a number of missions. There were hot gases that got past the seals, and the print was always the same. It's worse when it's cold at launch. The harm. One man had been saying more than anyone else. Roger Bwoley. In July, on March 31, 1985, he sent a note that felt it sounds more like a plea for help. He said the trouble with the O-rings could end in tragedy. He wrote that it might lead to the loss of living things. He said the business had to act right away. He talked about that he lived with real fear every day. The O-rings might break fully if something went wrong. Still, it wasn't fixed by early 1986. Fixed. Flights kept going, but there was damage kept coming up, and the start on the 28th of January was about to happen, and no one had ever been cold before. Thought showed a low of 18 degrees overnight Fahrenheit. That was a long way below the coldest start in the history of the program. Bogey and other experts like Bob Ebling, they were scared, as was Alan McDonald. As Theus night fell, they got together for a phone call with NASA managers at Sunshine State's Kennedy Space Center. And Alabama is home to the Marshall Space Flight Center. McDonald, who was in charge of Theo KSC, refused to back the launch. He talked about being cold. He talked about ice on the launch pad that could do not hold back and hit the rocket. He even talked about the rough seas that could booster recovery is affected, but the O-rings were really dangerous. Charts and all the flight info was shown. The builders said that the cold made the rubber turn over. Stiff. When it's freezing outside, seemed more like a solid piece instead a seal that can bend. But Jolie said that we are very worried. He told them that because the main O-ring didn't close in time, it's likely that the second one will fail too. He told everyone that there was more damage from cold travel than warm ones. He told them not to forget about the physical proof. Ebling Wash was so sure that bad things were going to happen that he said he told his wife it was going to happen. To go off. He said he thought God had chose the wrong person to carry this weight. At first, Theo's managers backed their builders. At 8:45 in the evening, told them not to start. It was rare. A worker who only wants to be late hours before the plane took off. What NASA did was right away. The bosses at Marshall, they were not pleased. Lawrence Molloy took a picture. Back with a line that sounds good today. My God, Theo, when do you want me to go? Next April. He was shocked by what George Hardy said. Engineers are worried. NASA sees the weirdest look, like they were adding a new rule at the last minute. Do not launch below 53 inches Fahrenheit, of course. They had 24 missions done already. They thought the info was always true. They knew what the risks were. Were easy to handle and were under a lot of stress to stay on plan. The Challenger was already behind schedule several times. Because of this pressure, Theo's management asked for a break. Meeting. The engineers were shocked. They had already chosen where to stand. Okay. They were now told to think again. As they talked alone, a senior business leader named Gerald Mason said they need to take off their engineer hats now. And took on the role of manager. That line made everything different. Slowly, and it hurt when the bosses changed their position. Around 11 o'clock at night, they went back to the phone call. They said the information wasn't clear. They that the cold was a worry, but not been dangerous enough to stop the start. NASA agreed with this change. Without any more resistance. Someone asked it if anyone else had something to say. Noon spoke. And then the way was set, but one man wouldn't sign, John Allen MacDonald. NASA asked for a written release, and Theo Cole's guidance signed because he left the line blank. Said no. MacDonald said he couldn't okay a launch outside the safe bounds. He said he wouldn't join in afterward in front of a board of inquiry and tell me why he agreed. He told NASA that hoped nothing would go wrong, but he knew it would not be the one to say yes to something he didn't think the boosters were ready for. The air felt heavy with his words. They knew they were taking a very big chance. In the end, scientist Richard Feynman compared NASA's way of thinking to a game. He said NASA had started to work on a lack of mistakes as proof of safety. If the cover broke, but the mission was still if they lived, then maybe it was okay. He said it felt like pulling the gun. When you play Russian roulette and think the gun it wasn't dangerous because it didn't fire. Though they knew there was a risk for a long time. Ahead of everyone else. And that cold day they tried to stop it one night in January, but the choice went ahead, and the world would see the next morning. Cost. Launch morning started out cold for Florida. That didn't seem real. The pad at 39°B had been frozen all night. When it was 1 o'clock in the morning, there was about 26 degrees, and the wind chill made it feel even colder. Lesson. Icicles that were almost 2 feet long hung from the trees. From the tower of service. The ice team at NASA walked on the pad over and over, checking the outside tank and all of the places where frost had formed. Heaters were running on some gear, but some places stayed frozen. The weather service said near the ground, the low had dropped to 22 degrees more to the north, around 100 feet high. The solid parts of the rocket boosters it was about 28 degrees outside. It was a bad make a sign, but the plans kept changing. By at 6 o'clock in the morning, the crew was getting up and getting ready for breakfast. They knew even though it was cold, they believed the checks for bugs. Managers of missions met once more. Engineers were not sure about the ice. They were afraid that big pieces would shake loose during takeoff and hit the tiles of the shuttle, so the launch was from 9:38 to 11:38. They hoped the sun would make the pad clear. At 8:35, the crew got dressed. They tried to stay calm down. They threw a football in the hall and then got up into the hop-on. What Scobie and Smith did was settle in front. That's Resnick, Onizuka, and McNair. Then came. Last but not least, Jarvis and McAuliffe inside. The list-making began. Mostly the morning light had made the ice less thick. Some people stayed on the north side, though of the building. Even so, the timer began keep going. By 11 o'clock, the last polls were taking place. It was said that ice was up to a point. There were strong winds, but fine to use still. No one brought up the O-ring worry again. It was thought about figured out the night before. Something small, the timer had been stopped earlier by a bug, but that was fixed already. Houston Kennedy and both of them tried. At 11:38, the shuttle took off. The twin lot of launch rockets went off at once. Flame. Challenger came out on top in a clearski, and everyone cheered. In the beginning, everything looked just right, but cams caught something very small. At 0.678 several seconds after takeoff, a small puff of light gray smoke came from the bottom joint off just the right dose. It was people were warned, but they didn't see it happen. It had been 30 seconds since Challenger pushed through max Q. The moment of greatest force of the air. The was shaken by strong winds. Hop on. In the end, it turned out that the wind swayed the car a little. When 37 seconds were up, the weaker booster the joint briefly opened up again. On film, there was a thin line of smoke after that, so it closed the hole for a short time. While the launch looked good from the ground. Smooth. As it kept rolling toward the ocean. With 58 seconds left, mission radio control sent out the familiar call, Challenger, turn the gas up. Scobie Roger, go at full throttle, he said. Was steady and calm. No one knew those were the last clear words from the crew. They were going up almost 10 meters high. Some people may have felt a jolt, but they couldn't tell what it was going on below them. On the 62nd second, a small spark came out of the right helper. The O-ring was completely broken. Superheated air close to 5000 degree came out and hit the outside tank. The booster started to lose air. The tank's hydrogen supply began to drop. Flames got bigger and cut through more. For seconds after that, an odd thing showed up on the control screen. It was seen by Mike Smith and just said, "Oh." It was the crew's last sound that was heard. Down on fuel was seen by cameras with bright flashes. Start to burn around the tank. At 72 seconds, the light was less strong. Strut that holds the right booster in place tank. It broke. The booster went up and down. Beating the tank like a ram. At 73.1 briefly, the back cap of the tank failed. Hydrogen and oxygen gas burst into flames. It came out and caught fire in a big ball. The sky was lit up by a bright flash. A Y-shaped cloud then came next. The Challenger was at about 46,000 feet, it's moving close to Mach 2. It was ripped apart by something. Cut off telemetry 73.618 a second. Then there was quiet. The next 3 there was chaos in the sky for seconds. The 2 they took off and flew on their own. Twisty roads. The engines of the orbiter shut down right away because their fuel sources gone away. Small parts of the shuttle spread out. The crowd didn't get it. Beginning. A lot of people thought it was stage getting apart. Others stopped moving in shock, but then things began to fall. By 1:10 the range safety officer had to act quickly and getting rid of the runaway rockets. Bomb-like charges broke them up so they would not hit places with people. More trash they went into the ocean. In 2 minutes, the sky was filled with nothing but smoke. People on the ground saw the horror settle down. Challenger was not there. Command and control stopped talking. The screens that had been clean lines of data all of a sudden didn't mean anything. This is what Steve Nesbitt said of the show with a voice that tried to don't move. People who handle flights here are taking a close look at the situation. There is clearly a big problem. It was the clearest word for the worst moment NASA had ever been through, and everyone in the people in the room knew the truth before anyone else. The official word came. In the afternoon, the search began. The area was closed off as the boats set out about 18 miles into the east coast. Only a few pieces sailed away. On the outside, the news came out everywhere. The president called off the What the Union is Like. Many people watched the keep showing it over and over on TV, the flash, the smoke, and the sky, the fall of things. Everything burned up on its OWN.to. Remember. Those 73 seconds showed it took the world a while to understand this story. I get it. The shuttle hadn't just blew up. It was no longer together. The fire boost from the right side cut through Thea shaped like a torch. It got hot.by way of the links that held the tank up together. The tank didn't work because the fuels mixed and caught fire. The orbiter the wings broke off. The load bay tore open. The engines broke apart. The nose was ripped open. The well-known cloud ono, TV wasn't the launcher. Going off, but the release and spark of the fuels for flight. The rockets took off, they got out of the fireball on their own, going around in circles in the sky. Cameras caught every moment of their wild paths until they were wiped out. However, the toughest fact came later. The crew do not pass out in the flash. The cabin stayed still whole when the orbiter broke apart. NASA didn't find any signs of a sudden at that point. There was water loss. Some of the team's own air packs had been brought on. There were 3 packs found. Turned on. That meant 3 or more pilots, such as Mike Smith and Judith both Ellison Onizuka and Resnick were awake long enough to get some air. The house might have shook, they might have heard somebody warn them. They may have tried to do something. Not long after, the cabin most likely lost air. At high altitude, falling asleep would happen, not even 30 seconds. Then the house fell 12 meters. When it hit the water at faster than 200 miles per hour. There was more force than any building or person could thrive. The study by Dr. Joseph Kerwin later said the exact cause of death could not be proven, but everyone agreed that the group didn't live past the moment from 11:42 in the morning, about 1 hour and 45 minutes after the breakup. Mission control was where the voices were weak and shaking. When the data went away, and the flight mechanics the police officer said the car had burst, the range safety officer told them about a big blast. A radio reader said there was no longer a track. Jay Green say in a whisper, "Oh no," as he looked at the tracks in the sky. Data was saved by controllers, the steps changed from start to just in case. From the stands outside, families had to wait. A lot of people thought the plum eat first, but other people knew. A NASA official told the families quietly say that the car was destroyed, there was no way out. A scream went up in the stillness. Krista McAuliffe's parents were led away because of the shock hit them. Ronald was born on February 3, 1986. Reagan asked for a group of well-known people to find out what really happened with the Challenger bad luck. He named a former secretary of William Rogers is in charge of the state. Soon it was named the Rogers Take Action. There were 13 people in it. Neil Armstrong just stood there and spoke in a calm voice. Chuck Yeager made the game tougher in the world of test pilots. General Trump, there were sharp senses in Kutina. The Air Force. Richard Wright and Sally Ride Feynman also said the kind of smart that would be able to get through any wall. On paper, the task looked easy. Find the cousin and make sure it doesn't happen again once more. There was a quiet message, though. Rogers heard from the White House that's right. Trump told him not to make NASA look bad. Rogers himself talked about how great NASA's work is and they seemed ready to keep the agency safe, but as the hearings started, there was still something not feeling good kept rising to the surface. The commission let the people in on February 6, which is only 9 days away after the team got lost. Leaders at NASA stepped in with long and hard-giving reasons. They talked about SRBs and ETs in dozens of places that were full. The room was filled with smoke. Some members quietly nodded, and some had a hard time to keep up, and some people watched with getting more interested. As the days went by, the focus got narrower. Everything changed toward the SRBO rings and the options made the night before the start. The New York Times reported in mid-February thought NASA knew about O-rings issues for many years. The public was shocked, but people like Feynman were grabbing that thread that's coming free. Afterwards, the event that changed the mood of the whole investigation. Officials at NASA insisted that the decision to start was habits. A high-level boss tried to say that everything was okay with Theo after we talked about a few small worries. I saw Alan McDonald sitting down there and listened. That was the person who wouldn't sign the launch permission given. It was too much for him and no longer. He got in the way of the hearing. He said to the group that Theo Coles engineers had told them not to launching and were told no. The space froze. It was like hearing a loud crack down the middle of NASA's story. Something had just been shown by McDonald. IT was huge, and he did it even though it could have cost him the job. After that, he was demoted for they spoke out, and the panel became so they made me angry that they put pressure on Theo to get him back. The business did it after Congress made it seem like their NASA contracts might not exist. When the panel looked further, they found memos that seemed like them coming from the future. In July 1985, Roger Bowley sent one. He said that people might die if the problem with the O-ring was not fixed. Other records showed marks from blows from planes earlier, especially when its cold STS-51C is launched in 1985, which burned the O-rings. The engineers had tried to sound the sirens over and over. Managers kept making no trouble here. It was becoming a trend. Impossible to say no to. Then the biggest well-known part of the meetings. On Richard Feynman on February 11, 1986, I clamped down a small piece of an O-ring and it was put in ice water and left to wait. IT kept going with the cameras. People leaned, moved forward. It was itchy when he took out the rubber. Stayed stiff and bent. He talked about in simple terms what that meant. The cloth stopped being able to seal and it's cold outside. Everybody got it. The room went quiet. His test was cut from every possible reason and trick fog. It proved in a flash what engineers tried to say for many years. Rogers had made NASA look bad, but this sucked. Wished to avoid, but it brought the truth to the table. From that point on, the panel had to take a step back. When the last report came out in June 1986, while the results were clear. The SRB joint capsule didn't work because it was cold, but the NASA's culture was the real problem. The commission said NASA did some things wrong in the setup. A lot of important safety information. They were stuck in the Marshall Space Flight Center. Concerns were not passed by managers. Up. The launch plan for 1986 was filled with 15 tasks and stress. Toto stay on track made a risky go fever. Where did every trip end? There was a problem that did not lead to disaster. Supervisors felt better about their jobs. With danger. Feynman said it was like roulette in Russia. Since the last, just because the shot didn't kill you doesn't mean that the safe for the game. He told NASA not to listen. Clear signs and treat it as strange as accepted damage just because there hadn't been any tragedy yet. Goes Sally Wright in secret, they helped find important proof. She found a link on a secret NASA chart. The temperature was hurt by the O-ring. She slipped it to General Kutina, who told everyone it was with Feynman. That graph helped show what the cold weather did. The story didn't name a bad guy, but criticized the atmosphere that was formed under William Lucas at Marshall. His engineers were disheartened by the way leaders led. From telling about dangerous issues. He even said in court that he thought the launch choice was a good one, and that Hay never saw the SEALs as a threat to safety. Rogers had to read him a NASA report says O-ring failure is possible could cause team members to die. The committee made 9 suggestions. They wanted the whole thing to be redone. O-rings and SRB joints. They asked for better talking to each other, a new office of safety with its own power source, and more launch plans that make sense. NAS agreed with the results. When the report came out, a number of leaders had stepped down or been moved. Lucas gave up not long before the story, but had to deal with harsh. Congress has been critical. Someone said his being cocky and smug helped make the terrible thing. Years went by, but the Challenger's story kept getting better. Between 2020 and 2025, new information came out from old records, documentaries, and files. People were finally ready to remember to share. It was 2016 and Alan MacDonald he gave Chapman his papers. Go to college. The same thing Oli did before. They worked together to make on a collection of letters, memos, and notes. The original was in MacDonald's papers. Launch forms that he wouldn't sign. Woolley's records showed how much he heard. Afterward. He wrote about being avoided, not paid attention to, or treated like he had wronged their co-workers. In one letter, A.C. Orker told him that if he hurt his kids would end up on Theo Colbajoli's front door. It felt like a look at how punishing people for telling the truth it's possible. After many years, they were Honorita's heroes, but at the time, carried their load by themselves. A big 2020 brought a new look at things. The Netflix show Challenger, The Final Flight. A lot of new opinions were heard. Lawrence Malloy and William Lucas talked right to the camera. Malloy seemed older and more worn out. Hugh was defending his choices but had a heavy words, like someone who played every night for decades. In his 98th year, Lucas said he had no doubts. Headed in 2025 at the age of 102. What he said that showed how deeply a certain way of thinking had shaped NASA. He thought that mistakes were a part of flying and that you couldn't avoid them unless you stopped moving. In general. Many people were shocked by what he said. Fans because they didn't sound like what people thought back in the 1980s. The Netflix show also showed new moments of feeling. It proved June people like Scavi and his family turned their putting sadness to use. They were made by Challenger Center, where they teaching kids all over the world about science and looking around. It helped me remember that sadness can turn into something important. Then something strange happened. It took place in November 2022. A History Channel crew looking for a documentary lost World War II ships off the coast of Florida. Long thing buried in the sand. When they sent video to NASA, as well as part of Challenger that is known. It was a 20-foot piece of the aircraft, the first since 1996. A big piece has been found. NASA said it was true and that the discovery the country one more chance to remember the 7 people got lost. Mostly the wreckage of Challenger are kept secret and Cape Canaveral has a nuclear silo. However, a new discovery made everyone remember that time does not completely hide stories like this. A new book by Adam Hygen comes out in 2024. More information was added by Botham. He found papers that showed that O-ring fears went all the way back to 1977. One engineer had named the damage a very important one trouble. That was a single fail. Could hurt or kill the shuttle. These basically, the signs were thrown away in the rush to get the first shuttle back in 1981. The book talked about how pressure from the government pushed NASA toward speed and frequency. Every delay looked like weakness. Every flight looked like proof the shuttle was safe. Higginbotham quoted a memo from Marshall that said delaying for O-ring concerns in 1985 would upset the schedule and that NASA headquarters would not accept that. It became clear that engineers like Boisjoli had been fighting not just a technical problem but an entire system built to resist them. New revelations also reached into NASA's culture long after Challenger. In 2020 and 2021, the Senate and NASA's Inspector General looked into whether NASA had truly changed. Some employees said dissent was still discouraged. They said they were told not to make waves when raising safety concerns. It showed that the struggle between schedule and safety never fully vanishes. The lessons of Challenger demand constant attention. NASA now has whistleblower protection rules and confidential reporting channels. These efforts exist because of what happened in 1986. Whether they always work is a living question, but their presence shows how deeply Challenger shaped NASA.